I've been an initiate in Freemasonry for 30 years. I mean, this is something that not many people have been. I don't practice any longer Freemasonry, so I'm kind of like...
right.
Because when I came here to the US, I went through a few lodges here in California. I understood the kind of connotation they had, the fact that they were very much politically leftist inclining, but also they were accepting. Some of them, no, there is some lodges who are more conservative.
Yeah.
But most of them were actually already branding me because of my association with, with Alex Jones, with other people. They were already seeing, this is Leo Zagami.
No.
And I didn't like that. and I didn't like also the fact that they, here in California especially, most of the lodges are infiltrated by the OTO, which is the Ordo Templi Orientis of Aleister Crowley, that became of Aleister Crowley, was born out of the Illuminati of Germany and Austria. Then you have people who have infiltrated from even the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups. So I just didn't feel right, especially when they said that a former Grand Master had criticized publicly Donald Trump. I said, well, screw them. I'm not into this.
Yeah. Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I am excited and delighted to be joined by Leo Zagami. Let me tell you about this incredible guy and what he's been up to. He is a writer and a researcher. His grandfather was Senator Leopoldo Zagami. He's a Sicilian politician who's also a historian and an author. And he married into the aristocratic family of Marquis de Gregorio. Leo's mother, Jessica Lyon Young, is a member of the family of the Queen Mother of England. And her father, Henry Lyon Young, was also a writer. And why am I telling you all this? Stick around, I'm gonna share that as well. Leo, aka Young, is well known and renowned in the media and music industry as a record producer, but he gained global notoriety in 2006 because of his direct involvement and knowledge of the New World Order and secret societies that we often refer to as Illuminati. His writings rose to international attention and gained such attention from people like David Icke, who you guys know from my show, because it contained accurate and evidence-backed inside information. Now, between 2009 and 2013, Leo began publishing books in Europe and Japan based on a wide variety of subjects. I've gotten into a few of them. They are incredible. And they range from the history of secret societies in the Vatican to geopolitical matters concerning the New World Order. He's contributed on a number of books dedicated to exposing the secret world of Vatican Freemasonry, and his work is just incredible. We're going to get into it, and you guys are going to have a lot to go on if you're interested in this kind of work. Leo, thank you so much for beaming in, brother. It's an honor to have you on the show.
A pleasure. Far out with the Faust. I hope you haven't done a Faustian pact of some kind, but we are here to.
I get that a lot.
Talk about all those who did.
That's right. That's right.
So
we are indeed.
I guess you have a lot of questions. We spoke before starting the show about.
Oh, I do.
The
so
books, mine. So, I mean, I guess you are well versed into my work.
I am. And so first, let me say that it takes tremendous courage and a big heart to do what you're doing and what you've been doing. It's not an easy road to come out and speak about these things, especially when you were so involved. And so I just want to tip my hat to you, my friend, and say that right off the bat. Utmost respect for you and what you've done with your life. Absolutely.
It's not an easy option to make that choice. And I guess that it's still not an easy option, but at least during the last 20 years, in some way, I managed to awake some people to the reality of what really goes on behind the scenes.
Indeed. Indeed, I can't even imagine. But so much to talk about. I thought we would start with, because I've never had anyone on the show who's so well versed and familiar with kind of this part of history, this part of the world, and what's gone on there, which is pretty unbelievable for a lot of people, particularly Americans who tend to be in general on the naive side about what's happening with the Catholic Church and with the Vatican and with some of these secret societies, But I thought we would start with the Jesuits, because I know I have questions, and I know you spoke about this extensively in more than one of your books, and I haven't got a chance to read all of them yet. But, my question is, how did the Jesuits go from being something that was outside of the Catholic Church, to something that I think could be considered a nemesis and a rival of the Catholic Church and the Vatican specifically, to the point where we are today, where it is kind of totally infiltrated and almost taken over to a large degree the Vatican and the Catholic Church hierarchy?
First of all, thank you again for having me on and for being able to discuss also topics that are kind of demanding for most people that, of course, don't have an idea, like you said, of what really goes on, especially in the Catholic Church these days. It's not really correct to say, though, that the Jesuits were external. They were external to the Catholic Church probably for 6 years. That was between 1534, when they kind of put together this group of friends, this idea in the University of Paris. And then they managed to get this idea accepted in 1540, because we were at the beginning of that delicate phase, which was the Reformation, and so the Catholic Church wanted to go on the offensive with the Counter-Reformation, and they didn't really have, since the demise of the Knights Templars, a military religious order that could fight the enemy of the Church in the same way. And of course, they chose for this mission somebody who had a very not a very clean past. I mean, he had been arrested 5 times by the Inquisition before really getting his order accepted, and in 1540 it was sanctioned basically by papal decree. But before arriving to the papal decree, he, with his group of friends in Paris, had seen what was going on. I mean, he had been also for a period in a college where Calvin, who of course is the guy who created Calvinism, was present. Mm-hmm. And so Protestantism was rampant, was kind of very popular, and it was gaining momentum. And they had destroyed the statue of the Holy Mary, which also in a way turned him to find these friends and say, we need to defend the church, and we need to do it with the foundation of a new order. But before all this, he had, in 1521, he was still a knight and a guy who came from an aristocratic family, who was injured in battle in Pamplona. And he was injured in battle, and at that point he went for a period to a monastery, a Benedictine monastery, which is a beautiful monastery in northern Spain called Montserrat. And basically there is a statue of the Holy Mary of Montserrat, which is a Black Mary. The traditions of the Black Marys goes back to Isis, because the Catholic Church kind of built up this worship of the Black Mary on the old worship places of Isis. And he he kind of had, like a religious moment, gave up his sword, gave up his military self to the Holy Mary. He gave up his sword. He left his sword in front of the statue, and he gave himself to religious life. And at that point, he was supposed to go back to Barcelona, but on the way, he found another holy place where he stopped in this cave, where he also started to devise what will become the foundation ground of the spirituality of his order, known as the spiritual exercises of Ignazio Loyola. And it was at that point that he created let's say, the spiritual basis. Then he picked up a mule, he put all his books, and he went to Paris, and then the rest is history. Basically, creating, though, an order from scratch meant also he had to inspire himself to somebody. And he took the inspiration from two religious orders. One was the Knights Templars, who, of course, didn't exist anymore. So when he went to the Pope, he proposed this new order, also knowing very well that the fact that the Templars didn't exist had left a vacuum in the church. And the Dominicans, who had taken the place of the Temple, like with the Inquisition and everything, were not as successful in stopping this Protestantism, this Reformation. Why? Because the Dominicans had been well known for having their Inquisition tribunals in the most harsh way and repressive way, and that didn't really make the people want to go back to the church, rather the opposite. Instead, the Jesuits wanted to be more subtle, wanted to become like the secret agents of the church, wanted to transform and infiltrate every single branch of society, which is what they did. That was the period, the initial period of Ignazio Loyola was actually filled by him and many collaborators of him, who believed in the idea that the church also had to retrieve occult knowledge from the East, and for that reason go to China, India. So the first missions of the Jesuits were actually in Asia, and it was in Asia that they expanded the order and found all the success, mostly because they invested in Japan, in the port of Nagasaki, which was just a small fisherman port, and transform it in a big port like Macau. Their basis initially, though, was Macau. Macau was a Portuguese colony. Now it's Chinese. Now it's the place where all the Chinese go and play. It's like the Las Vegas of China. But back then, it wasn't a gamble place. Back then, it was a outpost of the Portuguese. It was a colony of the Portuguese. And the Chinese wouldn't let anybody inside China because they also didn't know Chinese and they were forbidden from entering. So the Jesuits' first attempt to enter China didn't really go very well. And Francesco Saverio, who basically was the guy, the same Francis Xavier who expired the name of Pope Francis, because people think when they see the name Pope Francis, he inspired himself from Francis of Assisi. That is actually the more, it's just, to feed the masses with a false myth. In reality, he based himself on a saint, which was a Jesuit saint, and one of the co-founders of the order, whose first mission was to go to Asia. Wow. And he eventually died in the outskirts, I think in the island of Sachan. I don't know if you pronounce it Sachan, but in the outskirts of China, not yet been able to enter China. The idea was this: in Macau, we shape together a college with people who learn Chinese, and then we get them to enter China. But the first guy to actually enter China and have a certain degree of success and being able to then, within the matter of a few years, reach the highest levels of the Chinese society and the emperor was Matteo Ricci. Matteo Ricci entered China, and then, of course, he forged an alliance with the Confucian side. He wasn't able to forge an alliance with the Buddhists, and in fact he went on the offensive with the Buddhists and started to criticize the Buddhists, and the Buddhists started to criticize him. But at the beginning, they pretended to be Buddhist monks. The thing is that the Jesuits were very much camouflaging themselves, and they actually became lamas in Tibet and were basically welcome in the Buddhist monastery in Tibet. So they had also an experience. That soon after the arrival in China, there was also the arrival in Tibet of the Jesuits. And at the same time, they started also to spread through India from Goa. Goa was another important place for the Jesuits and for the Jesuits to be able to then, in a way, spread their tentacles all over Asia, which was the first place they really colonized. And then later on, another place which was of great importance for the Jesuit order, let's not forget, is still to this day South and Central America, where they, of course, together with the Portuguese and the Spanish monarchies, took all the gold possible and imaginable and conducted themselves in a way that was, of course, depicted also in that film, I think, Mission, no? Was that film, I think, with Robert De Niro. There was a film from a few years ago. It was a quite popular film, and that depicts that period quite well. I think it's from 1986.
Yes.
1986. And in fact,
I forget the name, but we'll find it.
The film is called The Mission, and it's a 1986 British period drama about the experience of a Jesuit missionary in 18th century South America, which I definitely advise everybody to watch because they will have a more clear idea of what we're talking about. Many films actually touched. There is also a more recent film, but I don't remember the name, that touched also on the Jesuits' mission in Japan and what happened over there. At times they were welcome, but when from time to time the monarchies or the people in charge of the country simply understood what they were really doing, they were kicked out of those countries. They were kicked out of a lot of countries. At one point,
lot of places, right?
Yeah. Yes. In fact, in the 1770s, they were kicked out even out of the Vatican. But that is a period.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. But that was a brief period. It lasted between 1774 to 1815, more or less, until the death, really, of Napoleon. Sanctioned a turning point. Also because let's not forget that they were definitely also behind Napoleon. Napoleon was himself a member of secret societies. As we know, he died in 1821, poisoned probably, but after a tumultuous life in which he had already escaped another island in Italy. He had already reconquered France in a few days, and he had demonstrated that France more or less was Napoleonic and wanted him there, but the New World Order back then decided that it was better to take him out of the picture because he...
That's right, that's how he got poisoned.
Yes, but he was very powerful, but he had also this initiation that he had received from Count Cagliostro, who was one of the heads of the Illuminati. So he was actually very knowledgeable, and for that reason he conducted expeditions that went all the way to Egypt, and it was during the Napoleonic period that we had the discovery of the Rosetta Stone that influenced so much later the whole unfolding of understanding these hieroglyphs that up until then were never really fully understood, if not by the Jesuits themselves, because there was a guy called Athanasius Kircher that was also very influential within the Jesuit movement. There is two Jesuits who influenced the Jesuit movement more than anybody else. One is Athanasius Kircher in the 17th century, and then the other one, of course, more recent one, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who died in the 50s, who was very influential on many different levels, because he inspired, inspired the Exorcist movie character, the main character in the Exorcist. He inspired 2001: Space Odyssey, because Arthur C. Clarke, like I explained in volume 6.66. This is something I explained in volume 6, the Pierre Teilhard de Chardin figure. But Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is such an influential figure that I also had to continue unfold this influence also in volume 7. So just to explain, while instead, if people want to become a bit more knowledgeable about Athanasius Kircher, I would suggest volume 3 of my Confessions. As you know, I wrote
volume 3.
8 volumes of my Confessions. On top of that, I also wrote another book called Invisible Master, and another one called Pope Francis, the Last Pope, ? Which is also been a bestseller. And I would suggest that everybody reads these books to then dig much deeper into what we are discussing today, because what we are discussing today will be considered superficial by the expert who maybe wants to know a little bit more, but you can't really go into 500, 600,
no, you can't fit it.
pages and then fit everything in an hour. It's impossible. So
no, it's too much. It's too much. You know, I picked up volume 6.66, and I'm about 70% through it, and I have more questions now than I did before I started reading it, and so I'm anxious to go back and read the first volumes, and also forward to read volume 7 and your latest book. So, but the book contains such exquisite detail. If you're interested in everything that we're talking about, you're going to have to pick up the books. They're remarkable. They're well written. They're easy to read.
No, but also what I try to do in my books, I try to give a book that doesn't turn old after a year that you read. I mean, the volume 6.66 was published in early 2019, and I mean, I have it here behind.
Mm-hmm.
I can show you. In early 2019, the symbol is the symbol of the World Health Organization. There was no pandemic back then. Just to give you an idea, the book opens with a citation also from Elon Musk, who is worried about the artificial intelligence, just like he's worried right now. There has been just recently an open letter about maybe pausing the development of things like ChatGPT because of the danger they might implement. But in this book, as you know, this danger is already been denounced. Just as I predicted, this book, Volume 7, comes out in early February 2022, already telling you about the war in Ukraine that wasn't even started, the Sino-Russian alliance with China, then the invasion of Taiwan, and everything that means this alliance between China and Russia. And back then, everybody was still hoping that maybe Russia will come on board and oppose, China will oppose Russia. It never happened. But everything
never happened.
But I described in this book also regarding the occult roots of the Great Reset, the link that Klaus Schwab has directly with China himself. He has an office in Beijing, and he has a son who is actually married to a Chinese woman. I mean, so I tried to then, for example, in Volume 2 that came out in 2015, I predicted exactly that in 2020 there will be a virus that will lock everybody up, and this is what happened. It was predicted in Volume 2. So I also gave books that kind of, not prophetically, I would say, but they represent a future scenario that unfortunately is unfolding. But it's a scenario that is been unfolding for thousands of years, and then this is the natural conclusion of it, and that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to warn people not to be superficial, but to analyze these things in the light of a much more complex world. And of course, also when you say Illuminati, you tend to generalize. When you say Freemasonry, you tend to generalize. So I give the more the specifics of what these groups really are. I try.
Yes. That you do. You go into great detail in the book that I'm reading, and the few that I've had a chance to page through. David Icke always says, if you know the journey, you'll know the end game. Once you know what the end game is, you know where they're going. You can see the totalitarian tiptoe that they do. It becomes, as clear as day. It becomes obvious. And, it's like once you realize the agenda, it's hard not to see it in everything that, we just had America's sensationalizes in the media every time there's a shooting. They do that because they need to. They're not interested in solving the problem. They're interested in taking the guns. Actually, that is the end game.
This is very important what you said, because in volume 8 of my confession, my latest book, I made a whole chapter to explain this problem and to try to make people realize what they can do, because here we're talking about killers that are often influenced by the society and the culture around them, meaning the music they listen, the films they view, the mainstream media propaganda they see. They are undoubtedly affected by all this. Even the latest event we saw in Nashville, it's influenced by an external force that is pushing this between brackets trans woman to act in a certain way. So the actual what I try to explain in this book, because this latest book, volume 8, is the first time I also go in my own personal experience as a DJ, record producer, somebody who has worked for a long time in the entertainment industry, who had also my grandmother, who used to work for a long time in the entertainment industry, who introduced me to the works of Aleister Crowley, who introduced me also to what really went on behind the scenes. My grandmother, Felicity Mason, Anne Cumming, was also a famous author, but she used to work with William Burroughs, Brian Guys, and she introduced me to all the cool people in the 80s, from Peter Gabriel to the Pet Shop Boys, to everybody, because it was like I was very young, but I had the fortune of having a grandmother who was from that environment. She was also during the war. She met my grandfather. They were both intelligence operative in the British intelligence, and they used to work in an office in New York when America was still not directly involved with the war, and she was an expert in cryptography. All the communications between the British Prime Minister and the American President went through my grandmother. So you can imagine the level of sensitive material they were dealing with. But I try to explain in this book the influence that culture can have. Actually, I talk a lot about these things that happen in the schools, starting from Columbine, going through other events, because often they are involving. I mean, like I said, there is this cultural influence that you can't deny. If you listen to certain kind of music, like those guys in Columbine did, play certain video games, you turn out then to show up like a trench coat mafia, and you do what you do. But the same thing can be said for other. Now, lately we had also another phenomenon which I denounced in my book. These rappers, even, who, like the guy in Boston, who goes on a car rampage, killing people after doing videos, showing that it is cool to be, a hip-hop gangster, one kind or the other. But here it's not about condemning hip-hop, because that will be, of course, superficial. But I must say that in my book I say I was rather shocked when last year, though Newsom made an effort to pass a bill so that no content in these songs and can be criminally, you can't criminally prosecute them in any way. So, make them then not anymore legally liable in any way. These rappers who maybe at times really push people towards a certain kind of like many also other kind of artists.
Well, that goes,
this is what I try to do. I think
Newsom is, he's born and bred. I mean, he's a poster child for the New World Order. He's a Pelosi. The guy has, forget about it. Newsom, he's got aspirations to be the next president. God help us all. He is as, quote, liberal as it gets. I can't stand.
He's a Jesuit stooge, because when you say Pelosi, you're talking about somebody who was brought up in Georgetown with the husband, belonged to a certain secret society in Georgetown, very influential one. And so we're talking about people who are really Jesuit agents. I mean, when Pelosi was actually condemned by a bishop for supporting abortion, and who didn't want to give him any more communion, she just took the plane and went with her husband to the Vatican, and the Jesuit Pope gave her the communion. So this is, the way things work out in that world. But then you have to understand here, we talk about the Jesuits, and the Jesuits represent definitely a very important part of this conspiracy, but this conspiracy has also another part that is helping out the Jesuits, which is the Sabbatean Frankists. Without the financial help of the Sabbatean Frankists, who are heretics from the Jewish world, the Jesuits will not be able to do what they are doing. Plus, the Jesuits initially, even Ignacio Loyola himself might have been a conversos, and he surrounded himself of conversos. Who are the conversos? You have to understand that in Spain, the Jews were heavily persecuted, and so they became crypto-Jews, conversos. They converted at time outwardly, not get persecuted. And then you have to understand also another thing, that the Jews are the first victims of this terrible heresy that has been following them now for a few hundred years, since Shabbatai Zevi, who founded basically this Sabbatean heretical movement, and then Jacob Frank, who claimed he was his successor and heir, claimed he was his reincarnation actually, and became his successor and heir. And that's why we call them Sabbatean Frankists. But, then you have the big problem of anti-Semitism, and people use too easily the word Zionism without understanding the connotation, because there is a good side to Zionism and a bad side of Zionism. We have also the labor Zionism, which is the labor Zionism is, of course, a product of the Sabbatean Frankists. And this, of course, not because I said, but because Jewish students and people who follow these topics have denounced over and over again. So I try to do my best to always be very much balanced in my take of things, because it's very easy to be then, do the error that, for example, David Icke did, and then being accused of anti-Semitism. I think that David these days has corrected everything by addressing the problem of the Sabbatean Frankists in his books, and I commend him for that. I think he did a great thing. He finally
They're going to continue to attack him, but that's all they got. Everybody who calls him an anti-Semite has not read his books, because all you have to do is read his books, and it's quite clear that he has absolutely no problem or qualm, or he speaks at length about how the Jewish people have been victimized. They've been used at every step of the way by these factions, and they also use the Jewish religion to hide behind, because they know it's a great cover. That these people, I don't believe that they have any true loyalty to any nation or religion. Their oath is to themselves and their agenda, their order, right? Their new world order. That's it. There's nothing. They don't go to church.
Nah, it's a bit more complex.
Go ahead.
In the sense, I think, yes, definitely they don't have any allegiance to any country in the world or any, and for that reason, they don't have any true belief in God, because they are in reality Satan's legion. So they act to serve the prince of this world and nobody else. They are basically trying to accomplish the mission, which is in the end to give this world in the hands of of this evil power. Rudolf Steiner used to call it Ahriman. We can call it Cyber Satan, which is now, of course, becoming obvious with the AI problem starting to increase, but it's only the beginning. In reality, Cyber Satan is built to support the rise of the Antichrist. So this is what happened. The rise of the Antichrist. It's something that is the product of Cyber Satan, and
yes,
I think that we need to understand that, of course, Cyber Satan is not a human being, because it's the AI manifesting all over the world, and by 2030 controlling all the system, this grid. But then you will have a human being which will raise together with it, which will then be identified as the ultimate Antichrist amongst the many we had. Right. So just to clear up.
I just saw a special. I was reading something that somebody said that actually BlackRock. I don't know about Vanguard, but BlackRock has actually been using an AI, a quantum computer, to dictate its business dealings for some years now. Somebody posted, I don't know if that's true or not, but it wouldn't surprise me, since these people have been worshiping computers and their models since before even algorithms were really prevalent. They've been running scenarios and using computers.
I explained this in volume 7, where I explain how Davos and the World Economic Forum was very much influenced by the studies that were conducted at MIT, studies though that were arranged by the Club of Rome in the early 70s, studies that were initially
That's right.
World War II, World III, which gave basically the predictions that the world
for climate change and global warming.
Yeah, I guess that they had.
Yes, people don't understand that's where it came from.
Yeah, their so-called sustainability project that brings us to Agenda 2030 was definitely born within that frame. But it wasn't only there that we need to search for the origins, because then there is the people who actually inspired this Klaus Schwab to start Davos. In that case, we need to talk about Henry Kissinger, but we also need to talk about a bishop called the Red Bishop of the Catholic Church at that time, called Bishop Camara, one of the most important figures in the rise of the so-called liberation theology. Now, liberation theology, when we talk about the Jesuits, we go back to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, because like Malachi Martin said in his book, the Jesuits, you can't really understand the developments in the Company of Jesus, which he was part of, because Malachi Martin was a Jesuit. He became a Jesuit and then left the Jesuit order after the Second Vatican Council, but to come here to America. But yes, I mean, he said, without understanding Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, you can't really understand the evolution of the Jesuit order in the last few decades. So that's why I said Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a very important figure. And of course, liberation theology and all that leads us to a communistic Marxist approach around Christianity, which it's what really Davos has been pushing also. Imagine that in 1974, when they invited basically Bishop Camara to Davos in Switzerland, in the middle of the 70s, they actually suggested Karl Schwab to not have him because he was regarded as too communistic. He was a Catholic bishop.
Oh my God.
But he went on, and he actually, when I indicate that also in my book, I say maybe 2 or 3 years ago in this initiative he does for the younger people, he was talking, giving one of his interviews where he said, I'm Klaus Schwab, and he was saying basically, my most important, the most important moment, critical moment in Davos and in the development of the World Economic Forum was actually when he invited Bishop Camara, and the choice he had to make to go forward in a moment in which communism was definitely not like today. Today, they made it acceptable, socialist, communist, everybody went left, right. But guys, during the Cold War, anything leftist was deemed dangerous, and it wasn't welcome anywhere in the West. So Schwab made a choice, and definitely he made that choice because he was a Jesuit agent, and that Camara was the guy who organized a secret group under the catacombs in Rome in December 1965, at the meeting known as the Pact of the Catacombs. For those who want to know more, Volume 7. So they can...
Volume 7,
Yes, they can eventually learn more about this important topic. Because, they all talk about the Great Reset and what really is the Great Reset today without really understanding where it comes from.
Yes. Its roots are deep. The Great Reset is just the latest branding of it, but its roots are far deeper.
Schwab is a professor, a German professor, a modern heir to Adam Weishaupt, who was also another German professor. They're both very much connected with the Jesuits, and they're both really the product of unfortunately, a product comes out of Germany, because it seems like a lot of bad things come out of Germany, also a lot of good things, but also a lot of bad things. And the bad things are really bad, and they include, the Illuminati, the Rosicrucians,
socialism, Nazism,
the
Rosicrucian.
We have before
the
that
Bilderberg group, right?
The Rosicrucians initially were even possibly a good group, but soon after they were influenced and infiltrated by the Jesuits, who understood immediately in between 1610 and 1615, when all the manifests, 1616, with all the various manifestos of the Rosicrucians appeared, the Jesuits immediately understood this is a group we need to infiltrate so we can then manipulate the reform. Because the Rosicrucians were the symbol of the rose and the cross is the symbol of Martin Luther. It's at the heart of the Reformation. So they thought, how are we going to get them back? We're going to get them back in a more subtle way. Then we go back to what I said earlier when I said, the Dominicans were too harsh. they needed a more kind of slimy way to infiltrate, and the Jesuits were ideal, very much ideal. In fact, the Jesuits created the fourth vow, which is this dedication to the Pope and nobody else, meaning the first three vows are typical of the religious orders, chastity, poverty, all this stuff. But then after you get to the fourth vow, and the fourth vow is nothing about obedience to Christianity or to Jesus Christ. It's obedience to the Pope, and whatever the Pope tells you, you have to do. And that's it. And it can go against Christianity. It doesn't matter, because your fourth vow pushes you to do. That's how they became the ideal tool in the hands of the church, the ideal tool. I mean, the fourth vow of the Jesuits became the way in which, because people don't know about the fourth vow of the Jesuit, because they think, but it is a solemn vow. At times, some religious institutions, have poverty, chastity, and obedience. That's what they have, and at times they can maybe go further, but nobody goes further as the Society of Jesus, because the Society of Jesus, in their constitutions, in part 7 of their constitution of the Jesuits, discusses the distribution of the members of the vineyard of the Lord. And remember that amongst maybe 40 Jesuits, only one becomes a fourth vow Jesuit. So it's very...
That's right.
Not like a secret society. It's
very rare.
Yeah. And of course, the vow is limited to the priest of this society, which in a way, it's also our superiors in the Society of Jesus. And I saw them often, these fourth vow Jesuits. I remember when I used to hang out at the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. On the other side, you have the headquarters of the Jesuit, Borgo Santo Spirito, and sometimes I used to see this Jesuit priest coming in the afternoon, like secret agents with a little, a little suitcase, little thing, I don't know, little, they were like
shady,
very shady, very much looking like they didn't want to be there, like they were invisible. They wanted to become, they didn't want to be noticed. So they were very much like the most ordinary priest at time, not even dressed as a priest. They would just go up. I remember there is an entrance at Borgo Santo Spirito. You have a guy on the left, like a portier, who then has these cameras and stuff, and he opens you, and you go upstairs. And I remember once I was talking with the portier about something, I don't remember. And then I saw these 2 or 3 sneaky Jesuits, sneaky-looking Jesuits arriving, in their briefcases and going up to the general, This is basically the reality of an order, which is, first of all, a tool, a weapon in the hands of the papacy, especially the fourth vow. Then, of course, you have... most of them who only take
anything you want.
So then, when you generalize and you say, the Jesuits, but which Jesuits? It's a little bit like when you say the Freemasons, but which Freemasons? Because, if you go to your order...
There's millions of them here in America.
The ones here at the local lodges, they are a little more than...
Those guys are drinking beers, hanging out with their buddies. They're like, listen, my friend John's a Freemason, okay? He's a great guy. I'm like, listen, all right, I believe you. Listen, I'm not saying anything is wrong with you and your friends. I'm like, forget I said anything. I understand that Freemasons, and I'm sure they're good people.
I've been a Freemason all my life, mostly, since I was initiated when I was 23. Now I'm 53. So I've been an initiate in Freemasonry for 30 years. I mean, this is something that not many people have been. I don't practice any longer Freemasonry, so I'm kind of like... Because when I came here to the U.S., I went through a few lodges here in California. I understood the kind of connotation they had, the fact that they were very much politically leftist inclining, but also they were accepting. Some of them, no, there is some lodges who are more conservative.
Yeah.
Most of them were actually already branding me because of my association with, with Alex Jones, with other people. They were already seeing, this is Leo Zagami.
No.
I didn't like that. And I didn't like also the fact that here in California, especially, most of the lodges are infiltrated by the OTO, which is the Ordo Templi Orientis of Aleister Crowley, that became of Aleister Crowley, was born out of the Illuminati of Germany and Austria. Then you have people who have infiltrated from even the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups. So I just didn't feel right, especially when they said that a former Grand Master had criticized publicly Donald Trump. I said, well, screw them. I'm not into this.
Yeah.
I wasn't really into joining. But of course, I mean, what I saw with my own eyes was this. And I remember even my wife is a Freemason because I got her initiated in London, so she knows about these things. But of course, here we're talking about regular Freemasons, so they accept only men in their lodges. But one day, we went there for an event that was open to the family also, and I brought my wife, who they wanted to join the shrine. They're called the Eastern Star. Yeah, Eastern Star. It's an order that is built for the wives of Freemasons. And yes, I basically arrived there at the entrance of where you have the parking place, and the first thing that me and my wife saw was this big pickup truck with an upside down pentagram and the image of Baphomet.
Oh, wow.
This is a black magic satanic symbol. Why are you letting people in with this kind of... And then I noticed that in that lodge where they wanted me to join, there were a bunch of young people who were obviously, I don't think, suitable because they were with the wrong values. They were all Satanists. They were all kind of like even if they posed as such, they were doing it maybe because they were following a certain kind of music and they think it's cool. I don't think it's cool at all to have those kind of people within the within Freemasonry. So
that was Crowley. Crowley's, his influence is vast, and as I don't understand it, but you know better than anyone how far his tentacles spread, into Freemasonry. It's crazy.
Yes.
For everyone listening, Aleister Crowley he's pretty well known, but he brought Luciferianism and Satanism, into a specific part of Freemasonry, and it took strong root in many.
Well, I think it's not him that started, though. I think what happened was this.
Okay.
In 1975, we have the arrival of the Theosophical Society. The Theosophical Society of Madame Blavatsky became the playground of the new Satanists and of the occultists worldwide who wanted to... If you think about it, it was actually Ariosophy and all those things that led to the murder of millions of Jews originated unfortunately from Theosophy, because it was a theosophical background that all those people who supported Adolf Hitler at the beginning and inspired them from his time in Austria. Even the symbol of the swastika was something that was used by people who were in the Theosophical Society.
That's right.
You had the people like, and I explained this very much in volume 7, you have von Liebenfelds, you had these people that basically were all connected to Madame Blavatsky's ideas, the Aryan race, the Atlantis.
She was a channel, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, she was a channel, but what was a channel? She was channeling, but what was she channeling really? At times, one wonders really This is a very dangerous kind of thing you're doing when you're channeling, and what you're channeling.
Yeah.
Now, Madame Blavatsky.
Look what the influence. Yeah.
Yeah, her mentor apparently was a guy called Max Theon. Now, her mentor apparently was also a Sabbatean Frankist, Max Theon. Some people, say maybe she was not mentored by Max Theon, but if you go and check the history of this guy whose name was Louis Maximilian Bimstein, he was a Polish Jewish Kabbalist and occultist who inspired this Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, this cosmic movement, and he basically inspired, he died in 1927, he inspired very much also Madame Blavatsky's moves, and basically without, I think, Theon, I don't think there would have been Blavatsky's revelations, let's say, and the link with the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor is also a very important one, because then we have the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and linked it's also the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, which is basically the basis for the early stages of the Ordo Principi Orientis, which then manifests with initially with Theodor Reuss and this other guy called Karl Kerner, and then later on becomes this Accademia Massonica that becomes the OTO. But Crowley then is recognized by these people, contacted because of what he was revealing and because they thought he could be suitable for leading the British section, and that's what happened later on. Then Crowley started to become very much involved with this German-Austrian secret society, but some people think that he was also involved with intelligence activities. And let's not forget that Theodor Reuss himself was a member also of a British London Lodge, which still exists to this day, which is Pilgrim 238, which still is the only lodge in England that talks German and exists from the times of Queen Victoria.
Wow.
And Pilgrim Lodge 238, which I had the opportunity, I mean, my mentor was the worshipper master of Pilgrim 238, Julian Rees, back in the days when I was initiated at the Kirby Lodge 2818. And I didn't get initiated in the Pilgrim Lodge simply because my German is not that good. Otherwise, I would probably join myself. But I joined a lodge which was equally important, and which also had some of the same members, including this Julian Rees, who was my mentor. I think that my experience, though, in Freemasonry has been at times difficult, at times positive, because at least I realized what was really happening and how influential these people really were. And I can tell you that the majority of Freemasons are not influential at all. No. A lot of them generally want to simply study these mystery school traditions. I commend them for not wanting to waste their time maybe at a bar or at a sports bar or in a pub. Instead, they go to a lodge. I mean, that's great. But when it comes to the people who are leading these organizations today, no. The values also of regular Freemasonry have completely polluted. Freemasonry was divided in two factions after the 1870s, the Grand Orient and the United Grand Lodge of England faction. But these days, these two factions and the values they represent are getting they don't really represent different values, because it's actually the United Grand Lodge of England that is going after the values of the Grand Orient of France. I mean, the United Grand Lodge of England is the one that now accepts trans men, trans women, all kinds of trans. They don't accept women, but they accept men who pretend to be women or women who pretend to be men. So, I mean, it's just like it's crazy. And then
so in other words, they're merging, right? Like the one was more progressive, and that, well, I say progressive. What I mean is less perverse and twisted,
absolutely.
And the other one, yeah,
they were
now
more progressive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
because they were always linked to the Jesuits, when instead the United Church of England was traditionally linked to the Anglican Church and always hold a little bit, because you have to understand the whole concept of intelligence services with the Jesuits was born also out of the necessity of the Reformation. But you had also Elizabeth I, who had John Dee, the first 007, and of course
John Dee. That's right.
Well, who was fighting John Dee? John Dee was fighting the Catholic Church. They were fighting, the
that's right.
The Spanish kingdom. So they were fighting the Jesuits.
That's
they were
right.
fighting basically. So this is really what happens here. There is a lot of confusion at times, but we can say that the Jesuits play more than one side, and they always manage to be very successful in playing both sides.
Yeah, they're very good at that.
Any other question you might have in mind?
I've been curious about this. I've kind of I don't want to call myself Catholic anymore, but I was raised Catholic. I'm baptized, and I received all the sacraments, and I'm no longer practicing, but I love God. I love Jesus. I comport myself accordingly, but I don't consider myself Catholic anymore because of what I've learned. But what I'm curious about is the Vatican, it seems to me, the more I learn, that the Vatican was formed solely as a power structure, that it was never, its public persona was never truly what it was made for, even from the beginning. It wasn't that it was corrupted. It was that it was designed with corruption in mind. And I know that you know the history. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, let's understand a little bit what the Vatican is, because otherwise people will have, confused idea of what it really is. I mean, the Vatican came up in Rome after a few hundred years. The Christians got accepted and became the state religion. There was a period in which, though, they were underground. With Constantine the Great and his mother, who was a very influential member of this sect, they manifested this as the state religion, which became also, in a way, the moment of decline for Rome, that eventually will transfer all the power from the city of Rome to the city of Istanbul, which at the time was called Constantinople, because Constantinople from Constantine. So, and that was then led to the period which is the Byzantium period, no? But the first 5 centuries of the church were, first of all, to understand what the Christianity really was, because we had those who were really close to Christ, who in a way didn't really want to deal so much with with Rome. There was, of course, James, the church of James. James was said to be the brother of Jesus. Already that it's kind of an uncomfortable position when you're saying the brother of Jesus. Okay, fine, but isn't Mary a virgin? So, and already creates a problem there. Then you have the destruction of the temple that succeeded Jesus, the destruction of the temple that Jesus himself had announced. So that was another problem on top. Then we had Paul Christianity, because Paul never really met, as at least it said, he never met in person Jesus. Though there is some skeptics who say he met Jesus because maybe Jesus wasn't really crucified. And there is a whole school of thought that But in reality, though, the first real Christian church was, the foundations were laid down for what is now known as the Coptic Church in Egypt. That is the most primitive form of Christianity.
That's right.
Still, yeah. To this day, the Coptics don't really held in high esteem the Vatican, but the Vatican tries to corrupt them and to make them join their club every day of the year. I mean, I was guested for a brief period of time in Cairo by the Boutros-Ghali family, which is the patrons of the Coptic Church, and they were receiving gifts from the Vatican every week. Like, they wanted to try to get them, close, but they didn't care because they know very well the corruption the Vatican has. So I was in Egypt, and I discovered, of course, many things about Jesus and the history of Jesus. And at times these things, they're not really the same information we get over after all these. There was, of course, the Council of Constantinople. There was the Council of Nicaea. There was the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Constantinople. There were the translation, but all this, everything was decided by councils, where at times they fought for ideas. For example, after the 5th century, you couldn't believe anymore in reincarnation. 5th, 6th century, after Christ, the reincarnation subject was banned by the Christian Church, and that was one thing that went out of the window. But people like Origen and the fathers of the church believed in. So how are you going to... So there is a period in which Christianity evolves. And in Rome, Peter, of course, we know what kind of disciple was Peter. I mean, he was the rock. Good elements and bad. But he was, a rock on which I lay the foundation of my church. But he was also the guy who basically betrayed, in a way, Jesus before he himself said, "You will renegade, my name. You will basically, in a way, you will try to."
And he wanted to hit Judas. Didn't he want to hit Judas with a rock? Who was one of them there, I think. And Jesus was like, "No, put that down."
It was definitely. But the thing is that in the end, Peter went to Rome, and he had to fight himself against people like, the influence of people like Simon Magus, for example, very influential back then. People who were claiming they had the same powers of Jesus, and they were very much in that frame, that political situation in Rome. They could have been used against Peter. Peter, in any way, laid the foundation of this sect that strived but for some centuries practiced in the underground. I mean, you just go to the catacombs in Rome and you see the traces of this church, which practiced their cult underground for many centuries.
Yes.
Now things are very different, but the Vatican then rise from they were underground and they rise above. But when they rise above, they became a state institution and they became one with the empire. And so also the power of the emperor, in one way or the other, was transferred to the pontifex. This figure, pontifex, it's a figure that existed in ancient Rome even before the papacy, the Catholic, the Christian papacy, the pontifex figure. But the pontifex figure is basically the figure, the Pontifex Maximus of Rome, is a figure
the head honcho, right?
Yeah, inherits somehow the elements of the emperor and the pharaoh.
Almost like a Caesar.
Let's not forget.
Yeah,
because after Caesar, you have the son of Caesar with Cleopatra. In theory, should have unified the East and the West in one tradition, and it would have been unprecedented. So it was a period of great turmoil. We have these traditions that kind of constitute the basis of the papacy. And the papacy is not simply a Christian papacy. It's also taking what came before and covering it up and
Yes.
making it their own.
Rebranding it.
I'm talking about the rebranding it. I'm talking about the cult of Mithras. I'm talking about many other cults. The ISIS cult, which I mentioned earlier, when it came down to the Jesuits, the rebranding of what the Black Mary, the ISIS cult under the Black Mary. Then we have Aphrodite. We have many other cults that were simply picked up and transformed. And when they didn't find a suitable option, they were rebranded as a saint. Suddenly had a miracle in the place where that pagan cult was worshipping for hundreds of years. Whoa.
Wow.
And they took over the show, and everybody will then go and visit that same exact place they visited for hundreds of years as a pagan cult, but this time maybe they were worshipping a saint. Because that saint had had an illumination right in the same place. I'm not saying that, but I think the problem here is that Christianity in its purest form was probably known by the community that lived with him and immediately after him with James. But Christianity, the Pauline Christianity, and what became later, well, we have to admit that there is a lot of things that have been made, and we don't necessarily have to believe them. But most Christians today, for example, when you talk about reincarnation, they will immediately tell you, you are an heretic, you are a Satanist, you are this and you are that. Hey, calm down. Because the fathers of the church say something different. This is so here we're talking about a decision that was made by dragging the Pope, literally. They dragged him, they picked him up. He was anchoring to in Istanbul, in Constantinople, and picking him up and throwing him on the ground and then there was some violence involved to make him then believe, to make them pass the version that they didn't have to believe in reincarnation. So, I don't know. There is many other things. Then, who is Jesus? Who is Mary? And many other things that we will never be sure until we have an open day at the archives of the Vatican. Then in that case, maybe we can have
transparency. Good luck.
But if I have to believe in all the things that the Vatican tells me, and then the Protestants didn't really protest those elements. The Protestants did some good things. They took away all that pagan saints paraphernalia that was kind of obfuscating Jesus and God. But having said that, they didn't really put into discussion the decisions that were done in the various councils. They didn't go back and reevaluate the figure of James, brother of Jesus, who still we don't really know much about. So maybe, if Martin Luther or Calvin or King James with his Bible approved, people think, Leo, I use the King James Bible. You should use it too. Well, let me tell those people that my ancestor was the... No. You just go on the internet, you can see it. My ancestor was the tutor of King James, his tutor.
No kidding.
Just so you know.
Wow.
I'm talking, but then when it comes to, I think, the closer and real Christian tradition is, of course, then also the Jewish tradition, because nobody can deny that Jesus was a rabbi, that Jesus was himself a member of a religion that still exists to this day. Now, the brother of Jesus was stoned, martyred 62 or 69 years, stoned to death by the Pharisees on order of a high priest.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea of what the first Christians had to go through. But, Clement of Alexandria said that James, whom the people called the Just, because he was an outstanding figure. I mean, and what does the Catholic Church do? They place him on the side and they give much more importance to Paul, a guy who in theory never met Jesus.
Right. So, right. Well, that because you had to take away incarnation because but they don't want people thinking they got another chance at it. That's a fear. That's a fear power structure, right? The role of women and everything was. I think the corruption came in the attempt to control.
Yeah. Also, also when it comes down to the women, the fact that we all know that the actual rule that the Pope himself now wants to actually discuss. Later, which is basically the fact that a priest can marry or not, is something that sprang up only 1,000 years ago, and it was out of necessity because they didn't want the inheritance to in a way.
That's right.
It was all property of the church, and they didn't want it to go back to some private guy with the son of
even the reasons for putting the rule in place were.
Yeah, so then they started with the hypocrisy. Then the hypocrisy, the son of the priest will be camouflaged and will then reappear becoming maybe this or this other figure. They will camouflage. The son of a bishop or a pope will still have relevance, but they will not be the son of the priest. They lived
so they made it a religious
lot of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And then another thing is that they created hypocrisy, they created the problems, and then in the end they helped the church becoming the perverse church of today, because now the church of today is a church in the hands of a bunch of hypocrites, because they claim they are basically accusing everybody, sodomy, homosexuals are condemned officially by the Catholic Church, and then 80% of the Catholic clergy is homosexual, and a large part is even pedophile. So, I mean, that is something that really it's a monstrosity in the eyes of God. So we are here with all these compromises, these lies and stuff that in the end have forged what the church of today, which is not a church that is a healthy church. It's a church.
No.
And then we have, of course, all the evangelicals, all the things that now are all gathering thanks to the Jesuits under one world religion banner. Even the Mormons have made a deal with the Vatican so they could build their own later Saints Church in Rome. So
the
they
Church
all
of
kind of
Saints.
got together. The Church of the Saints, the Mormons have made a deal with the Vatican. That's it. I mean, there is no opposition. There is no... The Protestant, the Pope says, Martin Luther was a great guy and everything is fine. And that's it. I mean, it's all kind of... And trust me, if Protestant, at the time of when the Jesuits came into action against the reform, had probably a more capable enemy, culturally speaking, I'm not saying militarily, because the military, Church of England was formed, but I'm talking about if they had the knowledge that unfortunately was hidden, but for the church, that at that time was the knowledge in the West. They had the knowledge. They were the ones that had the university, the school. They were writing the books. The books weren't even into print, if not thanks to them, first in Germany and then in Italy, the first two books, thanks to these monks, German monks that published these books. I mean, but before...
So, Leo,
if I prescribe
what's happening with...
And I say to you...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
I wanted to ask, Okay. So tell me, because I've seen over the last 3 years, I've seen we saw the churches shut down during the quote pandemic. and we saw, people and attendance, particularly here in America, was already waning, and now it's fallen off, and it's never recouped. And I see churches close, and the church has made a mess of itself in more ways than one, and they've created, a disaster between the pedophilia exposure and just the nonstop, the bad press, and the business deals. It's much better than I do. They seem to be in trouble. And what I saw from the government was, this carrying away of
yeah. But if you think about it, they are just following their own path, which is to put science in front of faith. That's it. Science, reason in front of faith, because faith is being destroyed. After the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church is no longer what it used to be. I admire those traditionalists, those sedevacantists, those people who don't believe in the church after the Second Vatican Council, because I think that everything that came after the Second Vatican Council is contrary to the tenets of the original Catholic Church. Whatever those tenets might have been, the last remains of Christianity was diluted after the Second Vatican Council, and the fact that they also chose to basically, in the long run, even dismiss and refute the Latin Mass, which was at the center, no? The Tridentine Mass was substituted, okay, but still, now the Pope is actually going after anybody that wants to have a Latin Mass, almost persecuting them for the use of a simple Latin Mass. So one wonders what is happening. And what is happening is described very well in volume 6.66 of my Confessions, and in my other books, in which I describe the takeover of what happened during the Second Vatican Council, even in volume 8, when it comes, which is, volume 8 is based on entertainment, but even the entertainment was changed after the Second Vatican Council. Yeah. Entertainment became, they even had Bob Dylan in front of John Paul II performing, or people like that. This would have been unimaginable before. It became like, let's open the doors to Satan. Let's open the doors to everything that we used to condemn, because now we are no longer condemning it. And of course that will include also groups like that might seem innocent, like the Beatles, but then when we see them putting on the cover of Sgt. Pepper Lonely Heart Aleister Crowley, we know that they're not so innocent. So the Vatican had succeeded in isolating itself a little bit from this decline until after the Second World War, the Freemasonry took over the Vatican, and the same form of Freemasonry, which was the progressive French form of Freemasonry, was behind the Second Vatican Council. They were capable of even initiating a Pope. Pope Roncalli was initiated by the French Freemasons. And then later on, Pope Montini was also another Freemason. So, they actually started having Freemasons in the office, which is regarded as the most holy of holies, which is the Vatican, the Petrine ministry, that nowadays, of course, is kind of like becoming more of a secular office, almost more secular, more normalized, because now we will see even this Pope probably soon resigning, just like the other one, just like any other job. Why
are they resigning? Oh, just because he's...
To eliminate that sacrality of, the Pope's sacrality from the Second Vatican Council was gradually eliminated. No more crowns, no more... no more popes that will live until the last day of their lives doing popey business, because that will, of course, identify them with a holy man, and they're just holding a holy office. They're not holy.
Come and go. More like a president or a prime minister. Yeah.
Yeah, which destroys the very nature of it, of this, because the nature of, I mean, it's like when Jesus gave Peter, on you I build my church, not that Peter builds his church, and when he's 84 or 86 or 89, he says, okay, I'm going to go and retire. He didn't, I don't think this will be even imaginable for the first Christians, So these days, they are operating also like the various Masonic rites that have also election, and Masonic bodies election for their grandmasters. There is only one Masonic rite, which instead is ad vitam, and that is the Grand Hierophant of the Memphis and Mizraim, which within the Masonic rite is considered irregular, at least here in America.
Right. Where did the black, I get so many questions on my videos, and people are like, oh, do a video about the Black Pope. And when, and I'm like, I have to find, I don't know enough to do a video, when did quote the Black Pope come to be, and what does that mean? What separates him from a normal Pope?
The first Black Pope was Ignazio Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. He founded the order and thereby was elected as the first Jesuit general. And the fact that they were called generals already gave the idea that this was a military order more than a religious one. But then, on top of that, in Rome, the people of Rome saw this power and said, wow, this Pope who dresses up all in black actually is more powerful than the one that is over there dressing all in white. I mean, he's a Pope, he's like a Pope. So the Romans nicknamed the head of the Jesuits the Black Pope. Though, having said that, the next Pope might actually be a Black Pope in itself, because he might actually be from Africa, but that is something different.
Wow,
so this is where it comes from. It's more like, that would be definitely the first. But the fact that they refer to as the Black Pope to the head of the Jesuits, and still they refer to him like that, even within the Jesuit order, because it became a tradition. It's actually, nowadays we have Father Sosa, who is from South America, like Pope Francis, and he is the current Jesuit general. After his predecessor, Adolf Nicolas, resigned, and the one before him also resigned, Covenbach. Now, this was the first time in history that even a Jesuit general resigned, but it kind of led the way to the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. So the first one to resign was actually Covenbach, and it was unprecedented. Then we had the unprecedented move of another Jesuit general resigning. And now we have so at one point there were two living Jesuit generals. This didn't happen before Covenbach died. Actually, there were three at one point, I think, when this was nominated. I'm not sure when Arturo Sosa was nominated. But in any case, it was an unprecedented situation because the Jesuits lead the way, and they took control of the church only once in their history, because before then they never wanted to have the Petrine ministry and become popes. They became cardinals, but they never, it was contrary to their ideology, to their program, to their mission, because when they take the fourth vow, they give themselves completely in the hands of the Pope. So how can they at that point become them popes? Who they gonna give themselves to? It didn't really function in the system. So I hope that this has clarified this point for your viewers.
Yes, it definitely clarifies a lot for me and for my viewers, I'm sure. Leo, you are an incredible wealth of information, my friend. I could talk to you for hours, but I know that we're running low on time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read at least 3-4 more of your books. And after I do that, and I have some very specific questions, I'm going to invite you back on again, because this has been absolutely incredible. But I want to delve more into your work and have you back on again, because it's just so much information. It's amazing. I'm so grateful for your time.
Well, I'm grateful for being on with people who are really interested in these topics and also in my work. So for me, it's a pleasure, and call me anytime, especially when we will be discussing my books. That would be a pleasure. So I hope that this show can be an introduction, as the amount of work that we could discuss is infinite. People can realize that simply by going on my books, reading my books. I mean, we're talking about each book being 3, 4, 5, 600, 700 pages. I did 8 volumes plus another 2 other. I mean, it's and all this is because when you are talking about the Illuminati, you're not talking about only the Illuminati of Adam Bishop, but about all those mystery schools of old that then we refer commonly, and also those secret societies we commonly refer to as the Illuminati, and everything though needs to be explained in an academic fashion, because this way we avoid any debunking, because they can't be debunking if your sources are credible and they are laid seriously in your book. Every time, like in my latest book here, it's over almost 700 pages. Then you go at the end and you have several pages only of all the citations, every single one of them. Right. And you will see also the amount of work is put on in really bringing a product that is impossible to debunk. Because my aim is, to go in front of these assholes who unfortunately control universities and say, okay, do you have anything to say about this? Please do. And it's like, because I understood this from the beginning of my work. You see, when I started my Illuminati Confessions in 2006 on the internet, it was difficult for me because I had to always base all my work on 1 or 2 pages. The span of attention of a reader on the internet is a few lines. Yeah. When I started to publish my books in Japan and then later in Italy, I immediately understood that it was very important to make my sources and my citations very clear. Otherwise, I would also receive criticism, from the enemy. They would, say, oh no, but he's not reliable. It's who is, they would say Leo Zagami has nothing supporting what he's saying. No. And that's why I then publish books with photos, documents, citations, say, this is it, boom. Now, in front of history, judge, I mean, I might have a different point of view, but what I'm relaying to you is exactly from sources which you yourself recognize, because most of my sources are academic within the realm of the secret society, or from journalists from even the mainstream. I don't use sources that might be debatable. No, this guy is a conspiracy, or this guy... Or I wanted to bring the conspiracy world to the next level, because I thought David Icke did an excellent job since the 90s. But then there needed to be something more, because he was kind of like not really approaching certain things, because, of course, he didn't have a personal experience like I had. And so he was keeping himself, he was discussing everything from an external point of view, no? And at times, also he had to trust sources which I personally was a bit doubtful of, some of the sources. But I rely only on myself. So I know what I'm saying. I don't have to rely on it. And my sources eventually came from the realm of the secret societies which I frequented. So I hope that is enough to make the difference and to bring something a little bit more in depth. And so I really praise and I think that David Icke has done an excellent job in launching this movement. Just like before him, Jordan Maxwell, though. Jordan was a friend of mine, the late Jordan Maxwell. And in fact, the last time I was able to see him, I brought him a copy of my book where I actually talk about him and I say how important he was for our movement, for those who are in search of the truth. And but there is definitely, I mean, Jordan was very knowledgeable, just as David, just as other people in this so-called truth movement, if you want to call it still truth movement. Like even Alex himself. But we're all doing our own thing, and I think that my own contribution has been bringing the discussion to a level that is a little bit higher, so that the enemy feels like, okay,
absolutely, here
I'm not going to be able to pull out the usual bullshit with these people because they're way too smart for me. So that is the field that people who read my books need to get, that they're getting, of course, the inner workings, and then that they can go in front of the person, the university school professor, the teacher, or the relative who likes to, their libtard relative or whatever, debunk. And they say no, but sorry. No, sorry, that's not how it is. Thank you so much for having me on, and God bless you all, guys. And we speak soon.
Thank you so much, Leo. I'll be in touch. Thank you so much. You take care.